Oh, totally. And have you ever heard of Israel's assault on Palestine with white phosphorus gas?
I'm not sure. I want to say that sounds familiar, but I know little to nothing about it.
Well, I've got about 2 dozen photos of that, high res, verified, and I've got the video to back that up. See, this is how hypocritical things are. The forces which control America's army, and I'm careful not to use the word America because I don't want to sully, tar and feather America. That's not my gig.
Well, we can just say USA Corporation. It's more accurate.
Amen, brother, because that's what's going on. Okay, because oh boy, right there, that's about 5,000 years of history in 5 seconds. We've gone from monarchical power to merchant power to corporate power,
Right.
backed up with military power. That is the new 21st century paradigm. So the United States in Vietnam, to protect the drug trade and to have another phony war for the military industrial complex, had no problem spraying Agent Orange, but Syria, which hasn't done anything yet, is instantly targeted, right?
Oh, my
Okay,
goodness.
so I mean, we hear about now, Sam and I, in the news, or through the grapevine, Syria launches biological attack. We just assume false flag in a situation like that. Is that definitely what you're seeing then?
Well, if the standard of proof that John Skull and Bones Kerry uses is YouTube clips, then I guess we're on a level playing field.
And all they do is continuously play the same clips every
That's right.
day for a week or 2 weeks, as long as this, surfaces onto the news, and then it goes away somehow, and then months later, like 3 or 4 months, 5 months down the line, it comes up and it's a much bigger deal. Or a much less big deal, but they're taking care of it.
And isn't it interesting how all this is happening right around the now 12th anniversary of September 11th?
I'm glad you picked up on that because I'll tell you
Tomorrow.
what, we need to have constant psychological propaganda thrown at us, even subconsciously, because people remember what happened on September 11th, obviously. I mean, who could forget that? The same clips of the same planes hitting the towers over and over and over and over and over again. So people are literally biologically programmed now over the past 12 years, chronologically programmed to be subconsciously patriotic. And that subconscious patriotism is reinforced by the external need for the security of not just America, quote unquote, but the entire free world in the interest of spreading, quote unquote, democracy.
Yep. One more thing that I think is interesting with Barack Obama posturing for war. I think it was in your film. I think it was you that said, there's no difference, or maybe it was in one of your interviews. Now, when you understand the history of the president, there's no difference between Barack Obama and George W. Bush. They're the same person, basically.
Well, the specific saying that I used is that Obama has out-Bushed Bush.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
And it's so true. And, I love the fact that these Hollywood anti-war liberals who were so vocal during the Bush administration are dead silent now. They've been silent for 5 years, right?
Yep.
So that just lets you know how much of a within the political paradigm they are.
Well, and now what's hilarious is you have Senator John McCain, the Republican candidate who was supposed to follow Bush, is now crying, "No war, no war." The conservatives are now crying, "No war." It's all a game.
Well, actually, I would have to disagree that McCain is against the war. He's all in favor of the war. I mean, the so-called opposition is actually in favor of a war that is not backed by any proof. This is insane. And I love the video of video after video of people in John McCain's constituency confronting McCain. Literally, they're now starting to talk treason, and they're citing the United States Code, which is perfectly accurate in McCain's case, because there are photographs which McCain referenced of McCain meeting with Al-Qaeda rebels, and one of the rebels in the background to one of those photographs was the guy who was videotaped knowingly cutting open the heart and liver of one of his victims and eating it.
Wow.
This is the guy that McCain hung around with in Syria. I can't write this up. This is insane.
Wow. Okay. Well, let Sam get back to his questions.
I'm loving this, but I'd really like to go back to the central banks now, Leonard.
Okay.
Just because I think that most of the, at least my consensus is that most of the people in my church and most of the people that I know don't really understand central banks, and they don't understand how they operate, let alone what they're all a part of and how long they've been apart. And just like you said earlier, you said in 1913, with, I believe you said the income tax was fully being implemented with the Federal Reserve. This is really great because, honestly, Leonard, the reason why my mind completely opened up to the New World Order was through the Federal Reserve initially, because I had no clue, and I was just studying it, and I was like, man, it seems like things aren't going the right way. The Republicans lost all this stuff, and so I started to look into. It's weird how God kind of works into situations that you don't expect, but I was in church, okay? And my pastor said something in reference to the Rockefellers. And it was a story that didn't even really have anything to do with the Rockefellers other than using their name, because it was about somebody who was basically name-dropping and saying that he was a Rockefeller, and he used it in context with some sort of message, and I don't remember the message, unfortunately. But that one part that I did get out of it at the time was the Rockefellers. I'm like, I don't really know much about the Rockefellers. And 2 weeks later, as I was starting to study, what has gone wrong with America since its formation? Like what has changed in our Constitution, what has changed in our policies and our codes that has made it so far from what it started as, because something's not right. And when I came across a series of things, I came across the Federal Reserve. And I, unfortunately, Leonard, went to public school and wasn't taught about the Federal Reserve, that it is in fact a privately owned bank that is not part of our government. And in studying that and watching different videos, reading up on it, I came across your documentary because of that. Because there's still, I believe, on YouTube, there's a link to your documentary. I think it's maybe one of the older versions, but it has the page with J.P. Morgan, J.D. Rockefeller, the Schiffs, and the Warburgs. That five-man picture, and that's what actually led me into this whole thing and got me into your film, and then opened up the door for a world of difference, I guess.
Well, that's good that you have a good grasp on the history of it. So let me give you a 2-minute crash course on the income tax and Federal Reserve. First off, the Federal Reserve is not federal, and it is not a reserve. All it does is act as a front for America's big banks. That's it. So when you get a US dollar, you actually are spending an IOU note. And that note is on loan to the United States government at interest. Now, keep in mind that this is how insidious the whole thing is. The only way to pay the interest on the debt, which was printed up out of thin air, okay, it's like Monopoly money, or me writing ones and zeros on pieces of paper and then handing them to you, okay? The only way to pay the interest on the debt is by printing new money. which also has interest attached to it. So that is the cancer that is part of the fiat currency system. And thousands of fiat currencies that are backed by nothing have failed. Not one has succeeded. In the colonial days of America, you actually had pine trees backing the local currency. It was literally called the pine tree shilling. And back then, that was a smart maneuver because you can use those pine trees to build your house, to build furniture, and to chop up and heat your home with it. It made sense. Why not pine trees, right? So back just before the Federal Reserve was created, the bankers said, there's no way the average member of the public is going to go for this, as in a private bank controlling the currency issuance of the United States, unless we engineer financial panics for a couple of years and then put out the idea in the controlled papers that a central bank would be a good idea that is privately run. Okay? And then the bankers had even reverse psychological propaganda behind their propaganda by saying that they weren't in favor of a private central bank, when of course they were the ones behind the whole thing to begin with. And it is very, very important to understand that these bankers were in competition with each other. And they agreed to put aside their competition and cooperate because, like the game of Monopoly, everybody starts with the same amount of resources, and the game is over when one person has a monopoly. And that can take a long time, or it can take a short time. It can take a long time if you are the most prosperous nation of the world, and say the entire continent of Europe is busy killing themselves over and over again in World War I and World War II, and is busy buying your resources from you, and is generally untouched by World War I and World War II, so the game can go on for generations. But in the end, the currency that you and I use is an illusion. It is printed up out of thin air, and it is loaned to the governments of the world at interest. This is unconstitutional. It is immoral. It is an unjust scale. And the bankers love their debt and death paradigm. And this is becoming increasingly obvious right now.
You hit the nail on the head, and the part that I think, again, you're talking about the currency, in the colonial days being backed by, land or, earth, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And anyway, the thing that I think a lot of people, including myself, I think I have maybe a slight grasp on it, but is how the bank operates on the fractional reserve lending and the quantitative easing.
Okay. When you sign up for a loan or a line of credit or a mortgage, the bank never fronts your creditor, the person who owns the house that you want to buy, any of its own money. It fronts the creditor other people's money. And that goes back for centuries based on what you said, the fractional reserve system. The goldsmiths of Europe were the world's first bankers. This goes back about, since even before the Knights Templars. This goes back about 1,500 years. And back then, the goldsmiths had a vault, and they said, well, we'll store your gold and silver for you in our vault for a fee. No problem. And over time, the goldsmiths realized that, you know what? People generally keep their valuables in our bank. And what they did was hand out claim checks for people's property. There were notes written on fancy pieces of paper that other people couldn't counterfeit. In other words,